Hi people, hope you're doing good. In this video we're going to take a look at the brand new single, which is called Into Paradise, which is out right now on Just Underground Recordings. So we're listening to the radio edits, and this is the most concise way to take a look at the composition, the instruments, the drum programming, all those different aspects, and we're going to take a look across this video. So let's take a look at the elements then. Let's go focusing on the drums to start off with. I'm soloing this group here, and I'm just going to show you something that I did here which is a bit different compared to what I would usually be doing inside Ableton Live, because very traditionally I've been using basically a drum rack and literally using that functionality. And one of the things that I find sometimes a bit annoying about a drum rack is the fact that all of the actual MIDI data is on the one track. Sometimes when I'm arranging, I actually prefer to be able to see MIDI data that's associated with a sound on its own dedicated track. So in this case, what I've done is I've set up separate, simpler instruments on separate tracks. And so from an arrangement perspective, I feel that gives me a much clearer perspective sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't matter, but then sometimes it does. I can't even put my finger on it and explain why it does and it doesn't. Sometimes I do things at speed and I don't care, but then other times I like the visibility. So in this case, that's what I've got going on here. And you can see that originally I started off with a different kick. And then, of course, as is very common, I changed my mind and switched to another. And in fact, that was very, very late in the composition. And the story is quite interesting, actually. I had a cold. I was sick when I actually mixed down and mastered this track originally and sent it to DJs. And then I listened back and I started to cast some doubts on it. And then I had a conversation with Red Rackham, and he runs a really excellent mentoring group. And he's got great ears, you know. So he and I were talking about it, and he said, well, you know, this thing's sounding a bit harsh. So I went back to it, and literally afterwards, you know, when I started to feel better, I realized that in that period, my cold was affecting my hearing, you know. So he was absolutely right in pointing out some deficiencies, which then I came back and worked on. So this is several kind of generations of this track down the line, and the final version that's been released is one that is very, you know, several revisions down the line. So, you know, lots of different steps along the way. And these are the kind of unseen battles that you don't always witness, you know, when there are tracks that are released by artists that you follow. It's very common, all right? It's not, people don't always get everything right from the very beginning. But the thing that I would take away from this is that be careful when you're mixing stuff or mastering stuff. If you are suffering from a cold, it can affect your hearing. It certainly did in my case. So these are individual simplers for these individual sounds. And then I'm running them through a group. So it's just for simplicity, really. And what's interesting is it's a mixture of programmed elements and then some loops here. So let's just refresh our minds on those drums. Let's have a listen. I'll solo you through these. There's the kick. I, in fact, took that kick from one of my other songs, Rock to the Rhythm. But actually, what I will say is I shortened it. That's one of the things that I did. I made it a lot shorter than the original. It's much punchier. There's a clap here and then a snare, which is a Waver Alchemy drum sample. So that's pretty much it with the beat, the basic beat. Very simple. I didn't pick up on the hat there somehow. Where is my hat? Oh, it's down here. Okay. So it looks like I've got a group within a group. Oh yeah, that's because I placed these two hats in there. So here's one of the hats. And the other one was simply a copy, but then moved a 16th to the right. And that's a quick way to get some really interesting movements. So just to show you here, if we bring up the MIDI, so that's on the offbeat. And then the other one is, it's moved over. It's the same thing, but it's shortened in terms of the length. And that's moved to a 16th. But in fact, I was swinging the 16ths here. Okay, so that's what's going on with those two. There is a programmed shaker as well. Let's take a look at that. I'll show you the programming. And that's also basically backed up by some other rhythmic elements. So these are the programmed elements here. And there also is I called it Timb3, which is kind of an abbreviation for a timbale. But it's not a timbale. It's a big kind of batucada, samba drum sound that I've used on many productions. In fact, it's very reminiscent of, in fact, the H-Man dub of Spend the Night. And I probably mentioned that before. There is also a break beat, which is a real kind of old school break. And that's swinging as well. You can see that in the grid. So these 16ths are moved to the right. And that was deliberate. And let's just have a listen. Let's solo the drums group and also the break. Yeah, I used to use hip-hop breaks a lot. And in fact, if you listen to the work that I did with Darren Benjamin, Daz IQ, as the Funk Stars, we used to put hip-hop breaks over house beats all the time. So it's something I do with fondness. So there's a break. Here's the tambourine as well, a sample that's put out on top as a loop. And then there are some crash cymbals that are put here into a drum rack. So that's the drum elements. Now, the other thing that's very important is kind of like the rhythm section is the bass line as well. Okay, so let me keep the beats running there. Let's do that. Let's get that break as well. And then let's drop in the bass. So have a listen to this. Now this is very classic Yamaha DX7. This is the Arturia version, and it's a patch called Lately Bass. Now one of the things that I did here was I went to the advanced section, and we've got here basically the ability to have this sounding like the old device. And, we've got the opportunity to use the old, the DAC, the classic kind of DAC on here. And the funny thing is I've totally forgotten where I set this. So we're just going to have to go and find this again. So basically the DAC is a digital to analog converter, which is essentially emulating the sound of the sockets on the hardware. The old classic instrument. And really, I've got to find this because I've mentioned it. Otherwise, it's going to be silly. But somewhere, here we go. Right, so there's a DAC. You can either have vintage or modern. The modern sound is super clean, all right? But my memory of the Lately bass was actually running through the classic circuitry of the DX7. So that's the sockets that you would plug into the mixer. So this vintage mode is giving it that vibe. And in fact, I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this. It depends on your system, but let's do it before and after. So let's do vintage, and then I'm going to switch into modern. And switch. For me, it's got the edge, and quite often I'm looking for the classic sound. It's very much an influence for me, with 90s house music. And this particular patch of the Lately bass was on so many tracks of the 90s, so it's always nice to come back to this. So I'm deliberately putting the DAC onto vintage to give it that old school vibe. You'll also notice that this is running through a few things here. Track spacer is being used because I've got the bass occurring on the same position as the kick drum. So what this is doing is it's reducing the frequencies around where the kick is. So let's just bring that up and I'll show you. So let's solo this. So you can see that certain frequencies are being reduced that are in the same space as that kick. And then also another thing that I'm doing to help with mixing it, and also just to give it a little bit more of an interesting groove, is I've track delayed by 11 milliseconds over here. So the bass is slightly later than it was programmed in. Okay, so that's what's going on there. Let me just take these away. Now on this section, there's a very characteristic set of chords. If you've been following my work for a while, you know that I'm a big fan of the Chord Triton. This is once again the MMG brass patch. Okay, it's something I've used a lot. Some might argue that it's a signature sound. And interestingly, I didn't switch on the classic DAC mode on here, and maybe I should have done. But you know, you don't want to mess with these things. If you've got everything sounding as it should be, you don't want to go and kind of switch it around sometimes, just in case. I was happy with it, how it was. Don't think there's any need to do that, but it's there. You know, I love the idea of these DAC emulations. I think that's something that's really exciting about modern plugins, you know, being able to authentically create the sound of the old hardware. So anyway, that's what's going on there. And you can see here that there is a auto filter, and that's basically frequencies taking away the highs. You can see that down here on the auto filter very, very clearly. It's also running through a delay. It's also running through the BX console AMEC 9099, which is something I use a lot. You know, I use this as a kind of summing mixer. I have that on every single channel, and then it's on my master bus as well, and that's giving it that analog style summing, and that's a fantastic product, highly recommended. So that's that, and of course there are some other musical elements. This organ sound, which I have used before, is the Basic Gospel 3 in Contact, part of the Native Instruments collection of instruments, and then some other synths. Halion Sonic, classic Steinberg instrument. Love the sound of this thing. Patch called Ascending Sweeps. There's also another thing that brings a real nice energy, which is this arpeggiation here. I'm going to solo this. You can have a listen. Let me bring it on its own, actually. Not the kind of sound that you would associate with this kind of style, really, to be honest. In some respects, that kind of arpeggio is, I don't know, I'm not going to say it's for trance, but it has echoes of that. But I designed it to work really in harmony with the other elements, not the warm pad here. If we take a look at both the bass, the chords, these elements here, and then also there's another sound I need to introduce here, the short brass. Have a listen to all of these elements together at this point. So they're working together, and as I said, you know, there's like the ARP itself, but what I want to point out here is this: the ARP is, and you can see this very clearly from this arrangement view, it's at one octave here, but then goes up an octave. So that creates a kind of sense of excitement. You know, I'll show you here. Let's put this together. So we're going to have just the ARP and also the brass chords. So the ARP is in the lower octave, and then it jumps up. Now when it jumps up, this other synthesizer comes in. So this is this short brass here. And by the way, this is another Arturia instrument. It's the SQ80V. Arctic Blues is the sound. So get ready for the transition that's coming up. You may not be able to hear it particularly clearly, so I'm going to solo this. So it's designed to complement the ARP. and of course the chords. And these chords, by the way, everyone always asks me about my chords, and my chords come from different places. Sometimes it's me sitting at the keyboard playing stuff in. Quite often I take what I've played in and I transpose it and flip it around in the MIDI editor. The other thing that I'll do is basically just seek chords in different devices. And I'll confess to you, these were chords that were in Machine, right? So Machine has the ability to generate chords, and this is triggering off the drum pads. And one night I was going through one of the sets of chords and I started playing around with it with the built-in polysynth inside Machine, and everything was sounding great actually. So the core idea, the roots of this particular track were made entirely in Machine. I ended up not using Machine, interestingly, for anything other than the MIDI that I generated inside Machine. And you guys know that I'm a big Machine fan, so that kind of probably feels a bit contradictory, but it's just one of those weird journeys that sometimes happens when you have an idea and you never know where it's going to go, where it's going to end up. But in this case, it was forged originally in Machine and then ended up in Ableton Live. So I exported the chords that were created using the chord device inside Machina. And the results are great. Very, very happy with this. So that's the origin of those chords. And of course, I built all of the other musical elements around those chords. That was a starting point. So I built the bass line, programmed it in, played some of it. It's a mixture of playing and programming. And then the other elements all came as a result being inspired by those chords. And I guess in some respects, it's similar to using the chord device inside Ableton Live, or maybe a MIDI pack and selecting some chords, So there are many, many ways to do these things, but that's how this particular one ended up. So the same chords are used on this warm pad. Let's take a look at this. Just love this sound, by the way. Another cool Triton patch. This is called Padulous SW1. Really love the texture here. And there are some other elements. Particularly vocal samples and then a hook. Have a listen. And this just works beautifully with that pad. Very heavily processed. So let's talk about the processing, right? Now, I'm using the IK Multimedia mix box. I'm a big fan of this. It's very reminiscent, of course, of the Slate Digital Virtual Mix Rack. Very inspired by that. But I'm not a subscriber anymore, so I don't have all of the kind of the devices I would like. For example, like the LA2A. So I'm using this. It's I love the sound of this. For me, it's just as good. So this is a vocal chain. This is starting off with the pop vocal, and I just tweaked it a bit. It was a preset. So it's running through a kind of channel strip, like a Neve style channel strip, the LA2A copy. There's like a kind of English channel strip here, and then the de-esser. And that was really useful. Now this is also running through Arturia's delay. And you guys from my other videos will know how much I love this. And it's a ducking delay. So what that means is that the echoes appear when the vocal stops. So have a listen. Into paradise, you and I. So in between, there are these really great echoes, and it sounds really futuristic, and I really love that. The vocal was originally a female vocal, and it was up high. And then what I did was I pitched it down. I'm not sure if you'll see that inside here. Yeah, there we go. Look, -2 semitones. So you're going to want to hear this, right? So here we go. Let's listen to this on its own. Let's take away the pad. Into paradise, you and I, we will reach across the sky. But I've used the vocal samples from that same singer so many times. I thought I had to do something different. So I took it down 2 semitones. Into paradise. Sounds like a male vocal now, but that's because I've used on here the audio mode is complex, And, this can give a sense of things sounding kind of masculine or feminine if you're using it. So that really works well. So there's a vocal there. There are some other vocal samples that I've got being triggered. And in fact, there is this kind of hip-hop style hey-ho vocal, which is almost verging on being cheesy. This is going to come up in volume. There we go. But I kind of wanted something commercial and cheesy, It seems to be that despite the fact that I'm known for making underground music, it's quite often that I'll make stuff that almost spans the commercial as well. So that's running through some processes. It's running through Black Hole, which is a really great reverb from Eventide that I've used quite a lot. And you'll see what's going on here where you go Black Hole, the mix, the size, there we go. There's certain places it's being automated to give a bit more interest into the track. So it's a nice, really spacious reverb. So what else is there? I mean, the structure on this version is very simple. Let me just condense some of this stuff away. It's kicking off with the chords and then almost like it's got a kind of like a false start. I'll show you here. So there's some of those vocal samples. And what happens after this intro is that there is a section with the drums and with the bass and the chords. But it's not the complete set of beats. You can see over here, that's when it all kicks in. So it runs for that 8 bars with these beats here, but then drops again. This time with a couple more elements, the organ, the high string. High string is the string ensemble. In fact, actually, this is something I forgot to point out. So these are filtered strings, and these are really important in this track actually, so apologies for not highlighting earlier. The same chords running through the auto filter. It's a string patch, slightly reminiscent of Deep Burnt by Peppy Braddock, of course. Yeah, I've used that kind of sound a lot. And actually, let me show you this. Something that's very key to this song is the fact that there is this kind of extended section from the chord progression where it's repeated. But what I do is I add new notes. You can see these kind of ascending pitches to create a sense of tension, and then I drop it and filter everything down and then kick all the beats back over here. So let's just do that again. Let's bring the other elements on. Okay, and now with all the elements together. So yeah, we were talking about the structure. This is now kind of the main section really. And got some vocal elements that start getting triggered now. Tambourine just lifting the energy up on the highs a bit. And essentially what's happening here is these musical instruments that I introduced earlier, like the ARP, the new layers that provide a new energy at this point in time. The vocals have stopped, as you can see, and you can hear, of course. And then we start building up to something which is essentially the chorus. But it's not a verse, chorus kind of structure. So in essence, you're having to wait all this time for the vocal hook, which is coming up, and the vocal hook is coming in when the pad comes in. So it's quite relaxed.
Into paradise, you and I, we will reach across the sky.
And this basically repeats. Nothing clever going on here. But to avoid monotony, what's happening is the other drum elements have been stripped back, and we've got this hey-ho vocal coming up on the automation.
We will reach across the sky.
And remember I told you about the eternity delay, the ducking delay. That, you really heard that, the echo fading down into this breakdown. And now we've got the same chords, but on the piano. The piano is the M1, the classic house piano. There's also a new musical element coming in here, which is this cello. That's coming from Triton. It's a patch called classical music. It's not really a cello. It's more like a string, to be honest. Once again, this musical tension. So the loop of the last part of the chord section. Those new notes. But then also, what I'm doing here is I'm just cutting and pasting the reach. So that was just building up to the last kind of musical section here. And really, this is now quite soon, if you're a DJ, you'll be considering mixing the next tune in, So really this is bringing back some of the stuff that we've heard before. But then after this, what happens is it gradually starts simplifying. And in fact, with the radio edit, what I did after I rendered this was to apply a fade. And it's an exponential fade. And what that does is it creates a real nice kind of fade, but you still hear it towards the end of that fade. It's not linear, okay? And I like that, it's got a real kind of nice vibe to it. It certainly works when you're listening to a playlist full of music. So anyway, that's that. And what I'll just do is just show you my master process. So I'm a Plugin Alliance subscriber, and I've got the Mix and Master bundle. So the BX Townhouse bus compressor is what I'm using to gel things together. And this is the lowest ratio, so 2:1. And attack of 30 milliseconds, the release is to auto. And that's just binding things together. Tape is used here, soft tube. So I'm giving a little bit of that kind of analog style vibe, some very slight saturation on there. The BMX, it's a bike thing. This is the BX. The AMEC. This is being used, as I said earlier in the video, to gel everything together in terms of the analog summing. And then I've got Isotope Ozone. And this is where I ran the Master Assistant. I'm not being clever here. This is me running the Master Assistant. And what I did was I loaded one of the Stuart Kettridge masters of the original Just Underground recordings, one of the ones that I was very happy with. And so in essence, I've got the virtual Stuart Kettridge, although it's not as good as him, it's still very, very good. And it's absolutely good enough to put out. It sounds incredible on all the systems that I've played it on. So yeah, that's what's going on with that. So it's available now exclusively at tracksource.com. It's called Into Paradise by Danny J. Lewis, and it will be coming out on streaming and so on in coming weeks. But right now, it's only available at Tracksource. So please support it, please chart it. Having some great DJ support so far. And it's also going to be featured in my mix. I'm doing a Tracksource mix session, which is going to be available publicly tomorrow. That's Tuesday, the 7th of June. Okay, so look, thanks for watching. Thanks for all the support. Don't forget also that I've started doing DJ sessions on Twitch. So that's twitch.tv/Danny J. Lewis. And I've got a wicked multicam set up over there. And so come and join me. Please subscribe. Come and join the sessions. Give me, let me know who you are, where you are. I'll give you a shout on air. I've got the camera and all that kind of stuff going on. All right. Anyway, take care. And just let me know if you have any comments. So I'll see if I can respond to them on YouTube. All right, cool. Thanks.